One could argue that humanity has changed a lot from the days of being trapped on Terra. But as with so many other arguments concerning human nature and ingenuity, many things have not changed since those early days of Sword and Sarissa. We still use lasers, cannons, and missiles to project our power and seek to put distance between us and those who receive our violence. There is no better practical, everyday battlefield example of this than the long-range missile. Afruz Farouk, Scientific Ethicist, Free Worlds League, 3145. Though guided missile technology has been around since the 20th century, the long-range missile system used on battlemechs, which benefited from being a uniform and standardized design, wasn't introduced until the year 2295. It has of course been refined and improved upon since then, but the fundamentals are essentially the same. The fact that LRMs can be fired indirectly at their targets at great distances has made them an important weapon for battlemechs, as so many of the other weapons are direct line of sight only. LRMs were designed to fire armor-piercing explosive missiles, but can be adapted to fire many other types of ammunition depending upon the needs of the user, but we'll get into those later. The missiles themselves are guided and are constructed from what is described as a metal explosive mixture that renders almost all of the device, including the casing, fins, etc., as part of the explosive result. This aided in the miniaturization process and allowed mechs to hold many more missiles without sacrificing each missile's destructive power. Usually fired in launcher groupings of 5, an LRM launcher can fire 5, 10, 15, or 20 largely self-guided missiles towards the target. The system's age and widespread standardized use has made it easy to install, maintain, and even upgrade with equipment like the Artemis fire control system. Loading up MechWarrior Online for the first time in years was surreal, and very quickly I was reminded of how little I enjoy this game. I quickly built a Mad Dog Prime with a couple of LRM-20s and medium pulse lasers in order to grab some video and experience all that the LRM boating had to offer. In short, it was incredibly unsatisfying to see mech armor flash from gray to light yellow to a slightly darker light yellow before some other mech killed the target or I was killed. If it's not immediately apparent I wasn't a big fan of playing an LRM boat back in the day, all in all, I managed to get a couple of kills across 3 matches and called it a win. There's definitely been some power creep in the game, as with all various new weapon systems they've added in the past few years. Once a mech closed on me, I tended to die pretty quickly. C'est la vie. Standard Intersphere LRM systems are designed with distance in mind, and the missile tubes tend to be angled up. This is why they have a minimum range of 6 hexes in the tabletop game. The clan LRM launchers do not have this minimum range, which I have been told on many occasions by fans of Intersphere factions is incredibly unfair. I can only shrug and say take it up with Catalyst. It is possible to hot-load LRMs, and that rids the Intersphere launcher of that pesky minimum range, but at the cost of accuracy and a little bit of danger. There's a +1 to hit modifier, and while normally you would roll a 2d6 to determine the number of missiles that hit, while hot-loading, you would actually roll a 3d6 and take the 2 lowest numbers for your cluster table result. The risky part, dangerous part of hot-loading your LRMs is that if the launcher takes a hit during combat, the missiles will explode in the launcher, doing their full damage. Adding insult to injury, the player must then roll a 2d6 on a 1 through 5. The ammo in the loader also explodes, setting off an ammunition storage explosion. That'll ruin most, if not all of your day. Hot-loading LRMs is not for the meek. Now, let's talk munitions. Because as we know, a missile launcher is useless without plenty of ammo to fire out of it. We're going to save the Artemis FCS discussion for another video as a specialty guidance equipment option. It deserves its own video down the road. Plus, we want to keep this video down under an hour. Now, before we get into all specific types of LRM rounds, keep in mind that unless expressly explained in the rules, you can't mix and match types of round. Well, there are some exceptions to this, and we'll get to them in a bit. Our first type of specialty munition is the Flare LRM. They're used to add some illumination to an otherwise dark battlefield. They're fired at a map location rather than a target unit, and they will light up the sky, eliminating the normal +2 to hit modifier for night combat within the hex hit, and 3 hexes in any direction surrounding it. The flares impact combat the next turn and will depend on the size of the LRM launcher used. An LRM-20 flare will last 4 turns, 15 will last 3 turns, LRM-10 lasts 2 turns, and finally just 1 turn for the LRM-5. This is one of those things you might consider if you know you're going into a night battle. However, having a ton of LRM flare ammunition is a considerable investment. In a more horrifying visual, the LRM fragmentation missiles are designed to rain down shards of metal on unarmored structures and personnel. If used against infantry, the amount of damage is doubled. This could be incredibly powerful if you know you're going to be facing infantry units in the battle. Unfortunately, the fragmentation effect does no damage to armored units, including tanks and other vehicles. For reference, an infantry unit of 20 soldiers would be completely wiped out by an LRM-10 if all of the missiles struck. Even worse, if that unit is in an open terrain hex, the damage is already doubled, so a full flight of LRM-5 fragmentation missiles would be enough to kill the entire infantry unit. Bad times had by all in that hex. For the firebugs in the crowd, incendiary LRMs offer the prospect of starting fires across your battlefield. Normally a roll for a deliberate fire is 9+, but with an incendiary fire round it's only 5+. The uniquely interesting aspect of the incendiary rounds is you don't have to carry them in full-ton allotments. They can actually be blended in with standard LRM ammunition. This is reflected in all rolls of the missile table when you are rolling for your hits. So when the player rolls, as if the launcher is one size smaller than it is. So if you're using that LRM-20, you would roll on the LRM-15 column. Additionally, due to their nature, incendiary rounds are more likely to cook off in a mech if it's in an inferno environmental condition, so something to keep in mind. Heat-seeking LRMs seek out the infrared heat signature of a target at which they are fired. The more heat the target is giving off, the stronger that missile lock. The Maximum Tech sourcebook has the table that will guide you to sort out how to modify your 2-hit roll. At 0 heat, which includes infantry and light vehicles, there's a +2 to hit modifier, so it's actually harder to hit if it's got no heat. However, as the heat of the target increases, your 2-hit modifier is going to drop into the negatives. For example, at 6 to 10 heat, there's a -1 to hit modifier, and at 11-15, it's -2, and for 16+ heat, it's a -3 on your 2-hit roll. Not too shabby for LRMs. This is another one of those specialty munitions that could be incredibly useful if you know your opponent is going to run hot, or if you're going to be fighting in a warm environment that's going to push those heat sinks to their limits. Semi-guided LRMs take advantage of TAG, the target acquisition gear, and with a successful lock, ignore the modifier for target movement. That could be incredibly handy for hitting those fast-moving mechs and vehicles, though you still have to get that TAG lock to begin with. The usual 2-hit modifiers for indirect fire and TAG spotter movement also don't apply, not too shabby. Smoke missiles, shockingly enough, create clouds of smoke that can obscure the line of sight on the battlefield. Similar to other specialty munitions, they're fired at a hex rather than a unit. The number of hexes this smoke impacts depends upon the size of the launcher. Specialty rules for smoke apply, but it's outside the scope of this video. They're in the Rules of War sourcebook if you need them. Swarm LRMs are interesting because the lore behind them is fun, while the rules implementation is horrifyingly slow. Basically, they're LRMs with an advanced targeting system that will seek out a secondary target if they miss the primary. So let's say 12 of your flight of LRM-20 missiles hit their primary target. That leaves 8 more missiles that can target an adjacent unit. This could be a friendly unit or an unfriendly unit. The attacker then rolls to see if those missiles hit the new target. There are details for these rules, but it is a slog, and there are 9 bullet points worth of stuff to dig through, additional reading required just to figure out how they work in specific situations. This might be one of those things that Catalyst looks at simplifying or just getting rid of entirely in future versions of these source books. The Swarm LRMs are a neat idea with a real headache-inducing rule set. Finally, my favorite of the LRM specialty munitions is the Thunder long-range missile. Originally designed and used by SLDF forces, Thunder LRMs were rediscovered in 3052, as so many other technologies were. Their battlefield role is to distribute mines across an area in hope of creating a nasty surprise for units that cross them. Similar to artillery and other specialty LRM rounds, Thunder missiles can only target hexes and not units. The strength of the mines depends upon the size of the LRM launcher, and from the point of deployment, any unit entering or passing through that mined hex must roll to see if they're set off using the standard minefield rules. I remember using Thunder LRMs exactly once back in the day, and as I recall, they were quite useful for channeling my opponent into a direction you wanted them to go. Unless, of course, they were willing to risk treading on a mine. And as we all know, the best way to avoid dying after stepping on a landmine is to throw yourself several hundred feet in the air and spread out over a wide area. Thanks, Blackadder. Now, it wouldn't be a Why We Love video without noting some of the mechs that are standout examples of the technology highlighted. For the LRMs, I don't think anyone would deny that the Catapult stands as kind of the quintessential LRM boat among the classic inner sphere designs. With two LRM-15s, the C1 variant can put up a lot of missiles downfield while still remaining potent in the mid-range with those 4 medium lasers. For the clans, the Mad Dog springs to mind quickly as it's in its primary configuration. 2 LRM-20s can't be ignored for very long, and there's little point in closing the distance since it doesn't have that minimum range and it has those large and medium pulse lasers that pack their own heavy punch. Other notable mechs include the Archer, Longbow, several variants of the Stalker, and the awesome 8R with its 3 LRM-15s. Good times had by all. Now, do you have a favorite LRM tale to tell? Is there a specialized munition that you have used to great effect on the tabletop? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading all of your stories of glory and misfortune. If you want to watch more, I'd recommend the Why Do We Love Pulse Lasers video linked above. Thank you for watching and your continued support for the channel. Now take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.